Okay, the last one we did was oil, and we're gonna do one more item. And to save a little bit of time, I am actually going to do the same thing I did before, but I'm gonna go ahead and start with 3 layers. I'm gonna start with naming them. I'm gonna go ahead and do, oh, I hadn't thought that far ahead. I'm gonna go ahead and do chalk. Let's see. I'm gonna go ahead and do, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and do chalk. Oh, I put a U in there. I'm gonna go ahead and do chalk. Background. Chalk. Shadow. Chalk. Color. Okay. I'm going to turn my spheres back on. I'm going to also turn them down to quite a bit lower, especially the middle one, because that's the next one I'm going to work on. I'm going to go to chalk color, I'm going to move down there, and I'm going to grab my circle selection tool, and I'm going to grab my selection move tool, and I'm going to make sure I hold the shift key so that I don't change the proportion, I just change the physical size. There we go. I'm a little trouble grabbing the upper right hand corner, so I just moved to the left, to the lower right, sorry. So chalk color, I'm going to choose a lovely, less saturated, kind of lavender color for this one. I'm going to grab my bucket, fill with the current color. Fill. Preserve transparency is on yet again. I know that it seems like an annoying thing, but I'm going to show you a little bit of an example now why we need it so much. I'm going to grab the circular selection tool and make an ovular selection again. This is the same thing I did in the last video in order to make the cast shadow and in order to make the things in the very simple shapes that I want them to be in. I'm going to go ahead and grab a dark purple, plop it in there, grab my background, and I'm going to make a square. And oops, I grabbed the make a rectangle tool instead of grabbing a selection and filling it, which can have some repercussions. We'll talk about that at some other time. But in other words, I'm going to hit Control Z and I'm going to make what I want to make. This time, instead of putting a purple color in there, I'm actually going to take a contrasting color. I'm going to take a yellow color. I'm going to fill that with yellow. And I'm going to go ahead and grab a deeper kind of bronzy yellowy color with my brush. The last thing I used was square chalk. I'm going to do that. I'm going to use square chalk. That'll be fun. I'm going to turn off my sphere. And I'm going to make this smaller. Last time I used my chalk, I also had it with nothing on it. I left the jitter up, and that seems like fun, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to make this brush size a little smaller. Okay, I'm going to bring the jitter down a little bit too, so that I have a little bit more control over that chalk. I'm getting a little lack of response, so I'm going to go to Edit, Preferences, Brush Tracking, and see if maybe I didn't set this quite right the last time that we were in there. I'm going to hit Deselect and Preserve Transparency so that I don't have to worry about getting outside my comfort zone here. I'm going to get a little bit more golden of a color in there as well, and a bit of lighter of a color back there. And again, I'm doing the fun part first because I guess I feel like it. So I'm going to grab the resaturation. I'm going to pull it to 0 so that I can make this into a blender. And I'm going to push the jitter back up a little bit because I think it's a little too clean right now to be kind of this artsy stylized thing, right? And I'm going to bring my bleed up a little because it's a little choppy right now. I want it to be at least a little blendy. And it's also a little big, I'm gonna make it a little smaller. A little too big again. Sometimes it's a little difficult to see what your item is. Okay, so I think that's an interesting texture we've got going on there. Okay, I'm going to do something similar that I did with the other cast shadow. Whoops, the other cast shadow, and I'm going to delete around it, but what I want to do is also add the chalk texture to make it appear the way we are doing. So I'm going to actually take Preserve Transparency off. I'm going to go back to my brush with the B key. I'm at resaturation 0, and I'm going to blend in from the outside this white. I'm going to actually grab the eraser and make it I'm going to make it smaller, and I'm going to blur that out more so that I lose that line that it is. And I'm going to change my tactics. That wasn't working quite the way I wanted it to work. So I also want, I'm going to hit undo. I want to erase that line, but I also want to leave that smooth shape there. So I'm going to bring it up a little bit and really smooth that shape out. So now I have that, I'm going to stay on the cast shadow layer. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to grab my brush, which is this square chalk, and I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I'm getting all of that texture. I'm going to go ahead and bring it back. I'm going to grab the dropper and pick that dark purple color back up, and I'm going to put more saturation down. I'm going to bring my jitter down because I really want to kind of control this a little better. And I'm not quite that big. I want a large texture, so I want kind of a larger brush, but I want to be able to just gently stroke it with my pen so that I get the texture. I'm really taking advantage of the paper texture without relying solely on my stroke to get me the color. That's why that fill back there is nice, because I'm getting a reinforcement of a darker color right under this orb. Okay. And I can also make it a little bigger. Just gently stroke out. This is where reducing my grain, or bringing my grain up a little bit so that it's a little easier for me to fill in, is good. That's a little too harsh, so I'm going to hit Control Z and undo it and just try again. It's a real advantage of being on a computer, is that you make something a little off, you can just redo it. And I am not too worried about this being the exact cast shadow or that being the exact background. I'm a little worried about how ugly that background looks. Looking exactly like, looking that it has that really sharp edge. So I'm going to go ahead and grab some white with this chalk and just kind of chalk in that sharp edge a little bit. I'm going to try and be careful not to make some super straight lines, which means I'm not pushing super hard. I'm going to bring my jitter up just a little bit again, so that I'm getting a little bit more of a variability. Now I'm getting some white up there. I'm not going to worry about that. I am going to worry about that, which is me grabbing a color that already exists and blending with it. But I'm just going to get that background just a little bit more like that. So fade in a little bit more. Then I'm going to grab my rectangle tool. I'm going to zoom out. And this time I'm going to select about the same area, right? Now I'm going to go to Select, Inverse Selection, and I'm going to hit Control X, and it's going to delete everything outside that selection because I inverted the selection. So I selected this rectangle and then said, okay, I want that rectangle. Now inverse selection, I want everything but that rectangle, and now fill it with nothing. Delete everything that's in it. So I'm going to grab my brush, and I'm going to turn my resaturation to 0. I'm still in the background layer. I'm gonna blend that hard edge out just a little. Hard edge out. Oh. I'm gonna turn preserve transparency back on since I don't wanna go out of my box anymore. Okay. Okay. And I'm liking how that looks. It's very textural. It's very interesting. It's not too textural. Oops, too textural. It's not. It's just very interesting. Okay. So now I can get to the thing I should really be working on, which is my sphere. So I'm going to turn my spheres back on. I'm going to select the chalk ones and whoops, hit new instead of a group. I'm going to double click on that group and I'm going to name it chalk sphere. And I'm going to open it back up and grab the chalk layer. And now that I have this, I'm going to keep my square chalk. I'm gonna grab dropper with the D key, click on it, and that way I can grab a really light purple and set some right here. Preserve transparency is on. My brush isn't brushing. Oh, there it is. No, it is brushing. It's just not brushing the right color. There we go. I'm gonna make this a little smaller because inside the sphere it's a little smaller. My preserve transparency should be on so that I don't worry about accidentally getting outside of my globe. Now I told you I would show you what it was like if I didn't have preserve transparency on, so I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to grab this dropper, I'm going to grab that brush, and I'm going to try really hard not to get to that edge, and I'm going to jump over it. And now maybe I should turn my jitter to 0 so that I have no possibility of losing control of my brush, right? I'm not going to lose control of my brush. It's not going to go over the edge. But now I'm going really slowly, and I have to pay very careful attention to what's happening on the edge of my sphere. Also, I'm not paying attention to the texture I'm making as much anymore because I only have so much attention to go around, right? So instead, this is also harder, and I don't like harder. So I am going to leave preserve transparency on and use it when I want it. Another thing is that you definitely want to use it because it prevents this, just as an example. There's another button over here, which this is a good time to show you what it is. It's pick up underlying color. So if I have a blender, right? So let's say my preserve transparency is off and my resaturation is at 0, and I'm using this like a blender, and I'm on this chalk color, and I'm going to turn this resample layer off, and I'm blending and I'm blending and I'm blending and I'm blending. If I go off this edge, I'm pulling in white. Well, that's weird. Why aren't I pulling in yellow? Well, yellow's on a different layer. As far as Painter's concerned, the yellow doesn't exist, and if the yellow doesn't exist, we can't use it. But if we turn this little puppy on right over here. Oh, and now that my background's off, you can see that I did miss when I was trying to be careful. If I turn this back on, and I turn my background back on, when I do this, it is going to use the yellow. It's going to sample the color from another layer and use it in blending, even though it's not on that layer. Now, when it does this, it does paint only on the top layer in which you're painting on. So if I turn the sphere layer off, my background layer is still just my background layer. You can also see that where I didn't paint, there is no paint, right? So turn my chalk layer back on, or my color layer back on, and you can see that that combined color is all on the color layer. So that's one of the ways that you can blend using watercolor. So I'm gonna go back to the square chalk, and I am gonna turn my jitter back up because that is just unattractive. And I'm gonna kind of blend that in. I'm gonna roll this around the edge because you know what? Oh hey, when I pull in from the sides this time, it's black. I think that's because our background color is black. My resaturation is still at 0, so I'm using just the outside colors and the inside colors to blend a very chalky, rough textured version of this item. Remember to get your reflected light under there so it's not, I can't let it get all black, right? Also, I'm going to grab the dropper and sample that real dark color so that I can get it back in the middle. I'm going to bring my resaturation up just a little so that most of the time I'm painting is blending and some of the time I'm painting it's going to be that darker color. And grab the dropper and do it again, but grab this medium color. So again, I'm getting mostly paint, but a little bit of blending there at the end too. And blend this in. Dropper, grab that light, blend my light spot a little bit. And you can see that, yeah, it's a lot lighter, but it's not completely light. Just gonna grab the dropper, sample for the light color, get lighter and lighter. Now I'm gonna grab the resaturation tool, pop it back down, and really blend those together. I'm gonna make my size a little smaller. And as you can see, I've got this really artistic, but very textural example of a sphere. And as I do this, I'm not being quite as particular as I was with the oil painting, getting it nice and smooth and really realistic looking. As long as I keep this really nice and light, I can get some really great texture without having that full-on square chalk. This is what I'm talking about, that full-on square chalk impression really showing itself on my sphere, which is what I'm looking for. If I go a little too far, remember all I have to do is hit Control Z and I can go right back to where I was a second ago. So I think that looks like a really nice sphere. Got some nice stuff going. Oh, so if I get that, I can just hit Control Z and it's gone. I don't have to worry about it. I'm not really gonna mess up the way you would do with regular stuff. And if you zoom out, that's really gonna look different. As you can see, this has got a bit of a hotter highlight, so I may want to push this down, bring my resaturation up just a tad, and perhaps a bit more. I'm gonna make my brush smaller so I don't put too much on there, and really give it like a little shine. And then grab my brush, lower the resaturation, and blend that back. But overall, that's going to give me a little bit shinier, a little bit brighter of a highlight. It will increase the contrast between my darkest point and my light. So this gives me a very nice oil painting, a very nice chalk painting.